Chris Mackowski for Emerging Civil War, and I am at the American Battlefield Trust Teacher Institute 2019 in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I am with the man when it comes to North Carolina, the expert, I think one of the foremost regimental historians working in the field today, Michael Hardy, who just gave a fantastic talk about the Civil War in North Carolina, the last days of the Civil War in North Carolina, and you had a pretty quick summation of that as we were walking over here.
Yeah, it was bad. And that's I say that oftentimes. People will come up with a question, what was something? It was bad. But the war, of course, in North Carolina and Virginia and other places was bad. There are 40,000 people is the traditional number of men that were killed, plus a lot of other civilian casualties going on. But, the war in North Carolina really is bad. We didn't want to leave the Union. We wanted, y'all just go do your thing and leave us alone. And we eventually did. One of the last states, depending on how the thing goes with Tennessee, one of the last states to leave the Union. But we contribute 125,000 some soldiers, 40,000 who died, traditional number. And we gave a lot. And the war was here, and it was all over the state. We don't have big battles like Gettysburg or Chickamauga, even though there are North Carolina soldiers at both of those. But we gave a lot. Men, material. The rail lines in North Carolina were vital to transporting supplies from the port at Wilmington, tons of blockade. Robert E. Lee's army is fed through the port of Wilmington really that last year. So just major Confederate presence. And really the last front of the war, with Sherman's army coming up through Georgia and South Carolina, and Lee, in the final days, wants to turn and link up with the Confederate army in North Carolina. We're really the last front.
And then becomes the largest surrender in those last days.
The largest surrender right down the road from where we are now at the Bennett Farm. It's now a great state historic site. They do a fantastic job over there of telling that story of the large surrender. Joseph E. Johnston surrenders the Army of Tennessee, but he surrenders a lot of territory as well.
Now, why is it you think that North Carolina's great Civil War story tends to get forgotten about?
We've not had a good storyteller.
Okay. Well, I'll take exception to that only because I think you are a fantastic storyteller.
Well, but I've only been telling this story for 25 or so years. If we go into the years right after the war, it's the people in Virginia that are telling that story.
Thus Pickett's charge rather than Pettigrew, Trimble's charge.
That problem started during the war.
Yeah.
The newspapers in Richmond really castrated the North Carolina soldiers and said they didn't support Pickett in that charge. Well, it was not their job.
No.
They had their own area that they were supposed to be attacking. And but the newspapers in Virginia really, especially after Gettysburg, really started telling only Virginia's side of the story. And people in North Carolina complain about that. Complain that, there are letters that I have that say that, if you read Virginia newspapers, nobody else is fighting the war. And that continues on into the late 1860s and the 1870s and on through the end of the 19th century. People telling Virginia's story, whereas North Carolina, Tennessee, Florida, those stories are not as prevalent.
Do you think that North Carolina has any major war hero, the way Virginia sort of has Lee or something like that?
Braxton Bragg.
Okay. And of course, everybody loves to harass Braxton Bragg, right?
Yeah,
so
they did.
But that probably works against it too.
I'm not quite there.
No,
I mean, Braxton Bragg, if he had better people working with him, underneath him, if Robert E. Lee, I don't mean to talk bad about Marsh Robert, but if Robert E. Lee is not sending the people he doesn't like to the Army of Tennessee, then maybe Bragg is a better commander. Bragg has good battle plans. McClure's Cove, right before Chickamauga, is a good, solid plan, and Bragg's subordinates get together and say, we don't like that. We're not going to do that. And the Army of Tennessee lost a major opportunity there at McClure's Cove. So...
Yeah, and Bragg couldn't do anything about the sort of the cast-offs that he got the way Lee could.
Yep.
Bragg stuck with us.
Lee could do no wrong.
I'm a big fan of Daniel Harvey Hill.
Daniel Harvey Hill. I think his biographer said that he was the best general that the Confederacy had. Mm-hmm. The problem is that if Hill is not fighting the Yankees, he's fighting his own guys. I think maybe the same biographer said that Hill should have been put in a little glass case that said, only bust in case of battle, only bring out in case of battle.
but fantastic on the battlefield, you know. Yeah.
Fantastic on the battlefield.
Yeah. So any final thoughts about those final days of the Confederacy as the Confederate cabinet is fleeing through the state and things are crumbling around the rest of the Confederacy?
I often wonder what would happen if Joe Johnston hadn't surrendered. Mm-hmm. If he would have moved back like he had been ordered to the greater Charlotte area. There are already 3,000 Confederate cavalry in Charlotte. You know, if Joe Johnston brings 10,000 other men with him, what's the rest of that story?
Because he still had his army intact.
Yeah, unlike Lee, Joe Johnston is not boxed in.
Yeah.
You know, he is still able to maneuver, and you know, Sherman knows that, and so I wonder about that.
Wow. Great things to think about.
Yep.
So, talk with Michael Hardy. I'm Chris Mackowski here at the American Battlefield Trust's Teacher Institute in Raleigh, North Carolina for Emerging Civil War.